And I remember in my interview, they said to me, they were like, are there any creators you think are like up and coming that we need to snap up? And I said, Grace Beverley. Sometimes we'll do outreach and like it won't be for another year and a half that they come back. When you reach out, make sure you're clear on your value. Like, don't reach out with some wishy-washy email which just like sends your links. Like, what is the tangible value for them? Are you going to get them people on their profile? Are you going to get them reach? Is it brand awareness? Don't just be like, hi, like, I'm Verity and this is my profile, please give me some budget. Because also there's that human element. Like, you negotiate first with emotion. If we get a yes straight away, like the whole of Team TBH across this, we're disappointed. We've done it wrong. Commercial exclusivity is when you can't work with another brand in that sector or who they deem a competitor. You absolutely need a contract. Brands aren't paying you for the TikTok. They're paying you for the years of work that have gone before that of creating free content and building an audience and building trust and building authenticity.
Welcome to Starting the Conversation, the podcast where we swap the mystery and glorification around business growth with honest stories and actionable insights. I'm your host, Alice Benham, joined this week by Verity, who is the founder and CEO of TBH Talent. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
I feel like I just need to break the fourth wall with the listeners that was my first time doing that in the intro and I felt very embarrassed, so I feel very relaxed now.
You don't need to feel embarrassed. I think that was a great intro.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It'd be really awkward if you said anything other than that feedback. So I'm going to continue the theme of embarrassing myself as we start this episode because I just feel I probably need to acknowledge for my past self, who would be slightly fangirling, to know that I was sitting down with you, because I'll explain why I haven't said this to you before. You're probably like, where is she going with this? I was a big old fan of the OG YouTubers back in the day. Weren't they known as like the Britcrew?
Yes, the Britcrew.
Like the thing. Big fan. Used to watch the vlogs all day long. I mean, there's nothing else to do back in the day, was there?
No,
Social
I was
media.
the same.
Yeah. And I used to watch all these vlogs and there was always this mention of these, you know, like talent management agencies and people, and I remember seeing your face and you were at these big parties and at these events with them. And then when you popped kind of, you know, into my world and I found you online again, I was like, oh my God, that's Verity. So I just need you to know that my 16-year-old self.
Well, it was actually me that reached out to you to be like, I love what you're doing. So I feel like it's very mutual.
Do you have that? Do you have many people kind of know you almost by proxy because you were connected to so many well-known people?
Yes, but like normally from a careers perspective, like a lot of the people who apply for TBH, like roles at TBH, have followed my career at Gleam and managing and representing those talents. So to an extent, yes. Both of the girls that work at TBH now followed me and my career history before, but only from that perspective. Nobody cares about me from any other perspective.
People don't come up to you on the tube and be like, oh my God, I saw you in a Christmas party Gleam vlog.
No, it's very much from a careers perspective.
That's quite handy though. It's like you're known in an area that is very useful, but you can still go to Sainsbury's and no one bothers you.
Oh my God, I'm far away from that. But yeah, I think it's very much just like careers, and I think people who are just really, really, really interested in the space, or maybe like followed Grace or Olivia when they tagged me, and they were maybe those people were interested in getting into Gleam or getting into influencer management.
Yeah,
that's when they'd maybe reach out to me or speak to me, which I feel like is pretty standard, I guess, in most industries. Like, you're always reaching out to the people who have the careers that you want.
Yeah, that's very true. And I guess when you think about it, we are in quite a niche world, but it feels like the whole world, doesn't it? It's like, does everyone know all these people? And you're like, oh no, that is just me.
Exactly. Yeah. It feels like a really small world, this kind of like, even the small business world, which I kind of dip into a little bit, like it feels like a really small world on Instagram. Yeah.
But I think in a nice way where, like you said, everyone kind of, you reach out to people that actually feel the same way about you, and then you're like, oh my God, we all know each other.
Exactly.
It's so nice. So we kind of talked a little bit there about kind of your career in the space. Can you give people a bit of context if they're not in my position of being a clearly fangirl obsessive
sure.
Of you? When did you first get into the kind of talent management and influencer industry, and kind of what's your career looked like up until now having TBH yourself?
So me, like you, I probably was looking at the influencer industry and being like, wow, like I really want to work in that. But just maybe when I was at university, I remember watching all the vlogs with the Britcrew and being like, seeing the Gleam offices and seeing that lifestyle and thinking, I really want that. And then a year after I came out of uni, I moved to London. I applied for a job at Gleam, and I was really lucky to get that because it was obviously a really competitive industry even then, and there were fewer agencies then as well. So I started my career then at Gleam in 2017 as a talent coordinator. And I remember in my interview, they said to me, they were like, are there any creators you think are like up and coming that we need to snap up? And I said, Grace Beverley. She is incredible. Her engagement's unbelievable. I think she had like 50,000 followers then, or fewer followers. But probably on Instagram then, that was a big deal. Like, I think then it was kind of more like YouTube and blogs actually, but there was obviously then that shift from blogs and YouTube to Instagram and now TikTok. They were already having conversations with Grace. So they were like, okay. I remember them like giving me quite a funny knowing look in the interview. And then I was allocated Grace. So that's how it works. You're like then allocated the talent who kind of makes sense for you and you're interested in what they're doing.
Yeah.
So she was one of the first talent I was allocated. I was also allocated to Kat Farmer, she's called Does My Bum Look 40, and the Mitchell-Acts. So if you know the Britcrew, you might know the Mitchell-Acts.
Yes. Yeah.
They're like a YouTube family, and they were kind of my like OG talent. And then I later took on Olivia Neal and did some really, really great things with her in just a year because she was exploding when I took her on. And I worked at Gleam for just under 5 years. I went from talent coordinator to talent manager to senior talent manager. Did probably thousands and thousands of brand deals in that time because it was just such a fast-paced industry. Like you were turning around brand deals so quickly.
And it was almost the industry was being created at that time, wasn't it? Like for Gleam to be one of like the first and only in that space, I'm sure so much of it you felt that you were kind of forming the concept of partnerships and sponsorships and working with influencers, and you were not really following a book, you were kind of writing it. That must have been a really crazy time.
Absolutely. And it was mostly about trying to get influencers or creators, whatever they want to be called. I always use the term influencers because I feel like it's the most widely understood term, but I understand that influencers don't want to be called influencers because it's kind of like a dirty word in a way. So I call them creators, but I go between the two. But yeah, it was about getting influencers the value that they deserve. Whereas when the industry started, there was all that kind of Gymshark, Grenade, those kind of brands that exploded because of the digital space.
Yeah.
And we're getting such cheap advertising because they were literally just doing it with organic Instagram reach, gifting, or like seeding product or affiliate. Because it was such an unregulated space, creators weren't getting paid for the value that they were bringing. Oftentimes they were bringing so much more value than even like the traditional media outlets at the time, but it just wasn't identified as a space that had value in it.
Yeah.
So it was all about changing that and educating and re-educating brands and agencies about the value that influencers could give. And over the time that we were at Gleam, we obviously started getting some really good case studies about that from our clients. So we were able to do that with those case studies and examples, start justifying their value and getting, building careers for them. So I guess that was like the brand deal side of things. But also we were carving out, identifying them as like media personalities.
Yeah.
In the way that previously, like, you had to be on TV to be a media personality. We were moving creators from digital first, who've grown their following on Instagram organically, to those kind of traditional TV and media outlets, which was really hard to do then. Like, we got, Zoella on The Great British Bake Off and those sorts of things. She, like, exploded the views on there. And we could get those talent on, but it took a lot of time and effort and convincing, even though we had these stats right in front of us.
Yeah.
Whereas now, the BBC have the Creator Lab, which is them trying to identify TikTok talent and Instagram talent. So, we're moving in the right direction, but actually we're still not 100% there. But it's just a completely different space.
It must have been such a crazy time for you, like working at Gleam in that space. I saw a LinkedIn post from you the other day talking about kind of your time at Gleam, and I think you'd written in it something along the lines of like, however kind of crazy it looked, all of the events, travel, parties, like things that were happening, like you said, kind of partnerships that were being created, like that is what it was like.
Yeah. It felt like we were really on the cusp of something. And I feel like Dom, the founder, he led and he made it feel really exciting. I mean, it was exciting, but he was the perfect person to lead the charge. I mean, he really pioneered the space. He identified the opportunity and he made it happen.
So then it's worth noting that you're now not at Gleam, but running your own company. Tell people a little bit about kind of TBH Talent, what that looks like, and then we'll dive into the conversation around partnerships.
So I left Gleam at the end of 2021, and in 2022 I set up a TikTok page, which really my objective was to just share information about the industry. Like, I was very aware that at Gleam we represented the best digital first creators in the UK. We'd pioneered the space. And we had all of this information about brand partnerships, podcasting, licensing, books for digital creators specifically, as opposed to those kind of traditional entertainment celebrities.
Right.
It wasn't that we on purpose kept it to ourselves. Obviously, that's kind of the way of the world, you know, like we were working together and trying to elevate our talent. And when I created this TikTok account sharing information about the space, about rates, about strategies, about the way that we as managers look at influencer brands, it became so apparent to me that there were so many people who did not know this stuff. Yeah. And to me, I was like, this is so obvious. And people were asking me these questions, which to me, I'm like, well, yeah, that's obvious. But to them, it's not obvious because they haven't worked in the space for 6 years. Mm-hmm. These videos that I was creating started gaining a fair bit of traction. And I took a little bit of a break from talent management because I had a non-compete. So I needed to wait 6 months to set up TBH. B, I needed a bit of a break because it's a really, 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 really intense job. And C, because I wanted to figure out what my next steps were and how I best serviced the mission that I was on to democratise the knowledge in the space. So I took a bit of a break. But during that time, I was consistently uploading TikToks and building an audience, a small audience, but an audience of relevant people. And I was understanding from them what they needed. And originally, my idea was to flip management on its head, where previously managers have just taken 20% of everything that creators earn and they have like elevated their careers and done absolutely everything for them. That's a traditional management model, which works really well in certain cases and is obviously why I still have that model now. But at first I was thinking, right, how do we service those people who can't get management or who perhaps don't need management? I have a friend who has like 100,000 followers. She's in quite a niche market. She took on management. My advice was that she didn't, but she took it on because she wanted it, because it elevates you. It does. It makes you feel like, okay, I've got management. I'm elevated. You know, I'm good enough to have management.
Yes.
Doesn't make it the right decision, but she took on management. They were actually taking 30%, which I took umbrage with. But again, she wanted management, and she knew that this management had talent in the same similar space. So she was like, makes sense. And she just lost jobs during the period that she was on their roster, because so many people can just call themselves influencer experts and promise you the world and take you on and just sit on your profile and take 20% or 30% or whatever it is on the deals that you're doing and not add any value. And that is what will happen if you're kind of sitting in that area where you're not really commercial enough to justify management and you actually could just manage it yourself. But you maybe need that kind of educational piece and network to get the deals, because you could do some deals, but you don't justify having management. There was so much of that on my TikTok page. So I was like, okay, how do I service these people in a way that actually makes commercial sense for me? Because I can't just do this all for free. I need to have a life as well. But obviously I don't want it to also not make sense for them commercially, because taking 20% of a £100 deal and it taking ages for me negotiating the contract, it doesn't make sense. Especially when I've got a team, etc. So I was like, okay, let's flip it on its head. So I've created a subscription where people can get access, 24/7 access to management advice. They get access to brand opportunities, the network. They get opportunities to pitch to well-known brands and agencies. So they get access to everything that we give our exclusive roster to an extent via a platform, really, that is manned by the management team at TBH. And they pay a nominal fee for that, but it's a subscription. Any deals we get them, we then take 20% off, but they can continue to manage any deals that they want to outside of that. But it means that if they then have a deal, let's say a brand comes in and says, we want to work with you, and they're happy with the fee, they're happy with the deliverables, and they maybe have understood that because we've educated them on the platform, they then don't need to give us 20%, because that might be a 5k deal that's the only deal they do that year. So they want to ideally do that themselves if they can, especially because they have the capacity and bandwidth to. And they don't need that kind of 360 support of like, hey, like we need to try and make this into a long-term partnership, or we need to add a royalty split here, or maybe we need to get you equity in the business, or maybe we need to suggest that you launch a podcast with this brand. They don't need that.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be relevant for them. So that kind of model makes sense for them.
Yeah. And I can totally attest to from personal experience how needed that kind of mid-level of support is, because like you said, kind of up until now it almost felt like all of that information was quite guarded, like unless you had full exclusive management, like you said, you kind of didn't have access to any of that support. And having like brand partnerships from kind of the last couple of years being a bigger part of my business model, it has, up until kind of finding content like yours that kind of actually gives you some of that expertise, very much felt like I'm winging it, making it up as I go along kind of situation.
Yeah.
Which, in a world where there's so much opportunity, for there to be so much complexity and uncertainty is really hard. And so I think it's so brilliant that you're kind of, you know, almost lifting the lid a bit about what happens behind the scenes and empowering people to understand it better so that they can then, you know, pursue those opportunities themselves or kind of navigate them in a more confident way. And the reason that I wanted to bring you on the podcast, obviously we're speaking to more kind of business owners here, is because I think business owners are wising up to brand partnerships and realizing not just that there's money to be made. You know, yes, it's, you know, like you said, we've got to think commercially as business owners about what makes sense. But I think also just realizing that that can be something that then drives more impact and opportunity within their businesses. Like, we talk so much as business owners and on this podcast about the idea of like diversification and having different income streams and not just relying on one thing. And I feel like with the rise of brand partnerships, particularly in the business space, people are starting to realize how well that could work for them. I'm seeing a lot of people that I'm friends with in the business space starting to work with brands more. I'm hearing a lot more questions from people. I was saying to you before we hit record, the retreat that I hosted last week, there were so many conversations of people realizing, I have a really relevant and engaged community. Maybe I could do brand partnerships. Maybe this would be interesting to those companies that I use or know about. And so I'm just really excited to share more of that expertise today with that audience, because I think people want to do it, but there's just all those question marks of how, pricing, where to start. So hopefully today we'll be able to answer a lot of those questions.
Yeah.
I guess as a start point, for anyone that is sat listening to this thinking, could brand partnerships even work for my business? Like, you know, I feel like I'm a business owner. I sell products or I sell services, but they're starting to maybe see other people do it, or they're realizing that maybe they've had some brands reach out to them and it's made them realize, oh, maybe this could be something that I do. What are your kind of insights, I guess, around like when looking to do brand partnerships is actually a viable kind of business model?
I think you've got to realistically look at your channel and think, what is the value here? And that could be a load of different things. Like, it might be like a really niche level of expertise in something quite specific. You mentioned Lucy Hitchcock. She's a great example of someone who talks about wine a lot. So wine brands are going to think, hey, I could fit in there, even though actually she's got a product and service coming off the back of that. That's a really clear opportunity for them to position themselves as someone who is an expert in the space. My friend creates things, like she just creates really nice UGC looking content of her creating different things. If you're Heinz, for example, you might be like, oh, maybe, you know, we could do like a brand partnership where we show how our products can be then created into something else afterwards, because she creates arts and crafts things for kids out of like nothing, basically. And if so, like, how could you pitch to those brands? Similarly, like, if you have reach and you're reaching a specific demographic and you get engagement, a bit like you reach small businesses. So if brands are looking to reach small businesses, you make sense to work with. So that's your value add, your very clear demographic. Or like Pretty Little Marketer, she has a similar social media managers, like how like Plannable obviously works with her. That makes complete sense. She is talking to their exact demographic. So it's reach, engagement, expertise, and kind of thinking outside the box as well.
Yes. Yeah, because I feel like can be so much more than social content. And that was definitely an eye-opener for me last year, was realising actually brands might also be interested in sponsoring an event. Sponsoring this podcast, for example, is something I've had for a few years. Sponsoring, like, I do an International Women's Day giveaway every year, and last year didn't end up doing it because it didn't feel right, but was talking with a brand that wanted to sponsor that because they wanted to get behind something that was helping female business owners. And I think for me, I had so many like mini light bulb moments last year of realising how valuable a brand and therefore the community that's connected to that is. I think I just always assumed like these big companies, I don't know, like I did some work with BT last year. I would just think, well, obviously BT's got loads of money. Like they'll just market themselves. And it's like, actually, no, they want to use that money to actually utilise what I've built.
Yeah.
And actually realising I don't know if this is slightly like dumbing it down, but almost realising like they want to throw money at you for you to put in the work to then market their thing to an engaged, relevant audience that already trusts me. Like, why would they try and reach 15,000 brand new people and get them through the buyer's journey when actually they could just give me some money and I'll sell it to the right people directly? Like, I know that's kind of dumbing down the brand partnership slightly, but like that was such a realisation for me of like, oh, that's the value. Like, they want to reach the people that I'm connected to, and actually there is an immense amount of value in that.
Absolutely. And positioning. A client I've got, Millie Gooch, she is a sobriety creator and she runs events for sober and sober curious women, you know, not necessarily just women. She's got a book called Sober Girl Society, so she's considered, you know, an expert in the space, and she runs these events. And actually, if I'm Anthropology, just an example of someone who's worked with them, you wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, sobriety event, because, you know, you'd maybe think they're fashion brand or home brand, whatever. But if they're trying to hit and engage with those purpose-led millennials and Gen Z, then hosting a sobriety event with a personality like Millie Gooch makes sense.
Yeah.
So, you know, with Millie Gooch, it's a great example. We don't just work with no and low brands or like alcohol-free brands. We do a lot with them, but we do sometimes work with Anthropology or, you know, ASOS, who are just looking to tap into that space. I feel like your audience talks are a really good thing. Like ASOS, again, are a good example. I think they've had Pretty Little Marketer and they've had Millie Gooch on to talk to their employees about something interesting, an expertise, or in Millie Gooch's case, that's sobriety, to show that they're kind of giving holistic value to their employees. So there are other ways that you can look at, I guess that's more of a speaking engagement, but in a way they're tapping into your brand, right?
And I guess for everyone listening, it's thinking about what are you known for, what kind of niche are you in, what kind of community have you got, and almost then reverse engineer, okay, which brands would be interested in reaching those people. Like in my personal experience, even just looking at like what's the software, what's the products, what are the services that you're using, that actually it would feel really organic for you to talk about or for you to kind of partner with, and would it then also make sense for your community to be interested in that as well. I think sometimes people just need to like give it a bit of thought to then realise, oh, there actually are quite a few brands that probably would be interested in connecting with what I'm doing. And almost I think you've got to see the value of what you've created to then actually accept that maybe there's opportunity that other people might want to tap into that as well.
Definitely.
If people are having these realizations, maybe they've been reached out to a couple of times directly by brands, maybe they've seen other people with these partnerships and they're thinking, okay, I'd love to explore, like, you know, whether it's through content, whether it's sponsoring an event, sponsoring a podcast, but they're just like, where do I begin? Do you almost see that there's kind of two routes that you can go about it? I guess either like outreach to the brand directly and like going after the opportunities versus waiting for those opportunities to come in. Talk to me about kind of those two approaches and what do you generally recommend to people?
The thing is with outreach is until the brand has the budget and it fits with their KPIs and objectives for that particular year, quarter period, whatever, they're not necessarily going to jump on it as soon as you send the email. Yeah. So don't expect that. Sometimes we'll do outreach and like it won't be for another year and a half that they come back. In my opinion, I think people are much better off showing and proving the value before anything happens. Like you're going to get so many no's as a creator. I feel like a really good example of this is, and it's a bit off topic, but I feel like it's a great example of how like you need to put in the work before it happens and show how you're going to add value before it happens. So like how as a small business owner are you including those brands organically in your content? How are you showing them you're getting those link clicks, those whatever it is you think they're trying to achieve? Joe Wicks, when he did his like lives every day on YouTube of is like Pee with Joe during lockdown, he first pitched that to like all of the broadcasters like Channel 4, etc., and they all said no. And then he did it himself on YouTube, obviously like exploded. The whole of the nation was pretty much getting involved. And then Channel 4 came back like, oh, actually we will do it. And he was a bit like, well, no, because now I've got a global reach. But it's a great example, I think, of how people will only take notice when you're already doing it. But you don't want to do too much for free. So I think it's that balance of like maybe identify those brands that make sense for you. So like, again, like Accountant She, I'm like, she is amazing and she's working with Go Proposal. Well, that makes complete sense for her. She's a small business owner which delivers a service, but she uses that brand in her service. So she's working with them. How can you identify those sorts of brands and then include them organically, but not in a way that they wouldn't otherwise have to pay for it. So maybe include them with other brands.
Yeah.
Maybe don't give them dedicated pieces of content. Maybe don't include them too regularly. Maybe just do it at a time when you know you're going to get value for them, and then you can say, hey, look at what I've achieved for you already. Would you be interested in extending this into a longer term partnership?
I guess it's great if you can come to them with some evidence and actually not just kind of go, oh, I think my community are engaged in this, but actually be able to go, no, look, like whether that's, I know people in the past that have used like their referral links to like generate some data and then gone to the brand and been like, look how many people have signed up because of me, let's 10x this.
Exactly. I was doing some consultancy for a creator who spoke to like the fuller bust community. That is like her thing. That's where her content performs really well, about clothes, about fuller bust. And she was working with a brand, and she'd been working as an affiliate for a year. I think she delivered something like £25,000 worth of sales for them. I basically worked with her to secure her a long-term partnership with that brand where they paid her an affiliate commission but also in a flat fee. And off the back of that, she was able to quit her job and start working as a creator. That is a great example of someone who has a really niche audience, but is delivering a huge amount of value, but hasn't been able to, make that happen with the brand or prove that to the brand, even though she's getting the affiliate income, which is, but you need the right words to be able to say that.
Yeah.
And you need the right tone. So that's what I helped her with. And let's say like she's not necessarily going to be able to work with Go Proposal.
They were like, huh?
Yeah. They were like, but she adds value in the category that she's in.
It's a lot of sense. And almost it sounds like with that niche can sometimes be better. I feel like probably some people would have the worry of like, who's going to be interested in reaching my community? They're just, people that are just interested in this one thing. And you're like, actually a niche audience probably means that they all are interested in the same products, the same services, which from a return on investment perspective for the brand is going to be a positive for them.
Yeah.
Actually reaching directly the right people and the people that are already kind of engaged and obviously trust the voice as well of the person that they're coming from. So with that in mind, I think there's some great kind of tips in there for people if they're wanting to kind of take more control of getting these opportunities. It sounds like it's almost a lot of like flirting, like you said, making sure that you're actually sharing the content that the brand could see them fitting into, perhaps making some of those touch points with the brand outside of sending them a pitch. Is there anything else that people can do if they're thinking, yeah, I'd like to generate some of these opportunities, or if they do want to reach out to the brand like with an idea? Like I definitely felt when I was looking at my small business events last year, I was like, a brand is never going to come to me and say, hey, could we sponsor 3 Christmas parties for 250 people? Because I don't think any brand has that on their to-do list. I knew I had to be proactive. What can people do to perhaps, if they want to reach out directly, are there any tips on what to do there?
Make sure you're hitting the right person, because we do it as well. Like we can be like sending emails to the wrong people. Obviously we're lucky because we work in the space, so we have a lot of the right contacts. Yeah. But if we're trying to pluck a contact out of nowhere, it can be tricky. So just make sure you're hitting the right person. But you can join things like our non-exclusive roster to be able to pitch to brands in that way. LinkedIn is really good, and using Find That Lead to like pull the correct email if you can. Or like if you have an email from someone else in the brand, you can copy the format and take the name. Yeah. Which we do a lot. Seeing which brands are actually working with people is a good one, because some brands just aren't going to spend the budget. Like you will see which creators in your field or which business owners in your field, who are they working with? Like who is clearly spending? Because
I guess as well, there's already all that like evidence there that they have the budget. It is something that they do. You're not probably starting from scratch of like explaining it to them.
Exactly. Joining like a network so you're able to access the right people, engaging with them organically, comment on their pictures, like comment on their Instagram, like DM them. A lot of the creators, if they want to work with a brand specifically, we're like engage with them on Instagram, because then if they follow you back, they'll see more of your content. So that's a good tip.
Just making sure they actually know who you are, so that, as you said earlier, like when they've got the budget or the kind of need for it comes up, you're front of mind. Because I definitely experienced what you were saying about that, of like you get in touch or you suggest something and it's like, no, we just don't have it, and then magically 2 months later they're like, oh, we now have so much opportunity. And it's like, you kind of do, I guess, have to be open to working in their timelines. Yes, because you are a tool that they are utilising to meet their goals.
Yes.
And so I guess being open as well, of like not expecting immediate results, being patient, putting in the work. It's like anything in business, isn't it? Just being consistent with it.
Yeah, and also that's the other thing. When you reach out, make sure you're clear on your value. Like, don't reach out with some wishy-washy email which just like sends your links. Like, what is the tangible value for them? Are you going to get them people on their profile? Are you going to get them click? Are you going to get them reach? Is it brand awareness? Don't just be like, hi, like, I'm Verity and this is my profile, would love to, like, please give me some budget. Because it's like, well,
what's in it for them?
This is a value exchange. Like, you need to be, if I'm paying you, I need something. So be really careful when you do that, because as soon as you send an email like that, it's a bit like, delete.
Really spell out the value to them, which I feel like goes back to what you were saying earlier, of actually knowing what your value is that you're going to bring before you go into doing any of this work. Let's talk about pricing. I feel like this is the area that has the most smoke and mirrors and uncertainty. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. What mistakes do you see people making when it comes to pricing, or perhaps negotiating pricing when they're working with brands?
Not knowing their value, which I guess is really obvious, but like overcharging or undercharging.
Right.
And it's because people are, again, not looking at, is it conversion? Is it brand awareness? Like, am I getting engagement? A brand using this for UGC? Am I creating a really good piece of content, but actually it's not for my page, it's for theirs?
Yeah. How do you know, though, when you're in that, if someone isn't perhaps working with management and they kind of don't, I guess you've got the expertise, right, where you can probably do the mental maths quite well of like, okay, this industry, this brand, this offering, right, it probably needs to sit here. If people are getting emails from a brand and going, okay, what's your price for this? Like, are there any tools? Is this something that you have within your like membership? Like, how do people even start to work out what those numbers would be?
So I'm always really careful not to be like, if you've got 1,000 followers, you can charge whatever, because it's not like that. It's someone has 20,000 followers but has 10% engagement. It's completely different to like if someone has 20,000 followers and 1% engagement. It's just like, that's just the, the absolute tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Because then it's like expertise, quality of content, like how long it's going to take them to shoot their content. Is there something niche about their content that you're charging more for? So, for example, that person who is full of bust. If a full of bust brand comes in, I'm charging more for that than if a HelloFresh comes in, because that's her expertise. She knows, she is going to convert there.
I guess as well, thinking of like who the brand is, what they're selling, and like what it would mean for them to have that exposure and conversion as well.
Yeah. So setting rates isn't black and white. That's where I really struggle. So we do rate card calculations with our non-exclusive roster. They'll come on, we'll look at all their back-end stats, analytics, etc. And they'll be like, this is the sort of thing you should be charging. But I have to look at their profile, the back-end stats, the analytics. Otherwise, I'm just making things up. I also always ask them, do you have affiliate data? Like, what's your content that's performing the best? What platform is performing the best? Because then we can maybe like create short video packages, or there's ways to look at your value and add it up in a specific way to maximize budget whilst keeping it relatively low lift. Could you, for example, post one video across TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube Shorts, maximize the potential reach for the brand? Yeah. You're only creating one video. I realise I'm still not telling you how much to charge.
Well, I know it's an impossible question to answer, right? And I've come across like various calculators or like guidelines, and I think things like that can be helpful to even just like do a bit of benchmarking.
Yeah.
I would say from personal experience, one of the biggest things that's helped me, and I guess this is part of the benefit of being in that kind of networking community, is just talking to other people about it. Like, I am the first, if one of my friends has got a brand partnership, I'm the first to message them and be like, how much?
Yeah.
What do you charge? What do you get paid? And it's not, like, yes, I'm nosy, but it's mainly because I think when we have a level of transparency, obviously, in private spaces, I wouldn't go and share stuff publicly, obviously, but like, I think knowing also, like, if you know someone that's working with a similar brand or does similar work, like sometimes that conversation as well, I think, can help you to benchmark. Because I wonder if you mostly notice the trend is people undercharging. I wonder if that would, or maybe it's the opposite.
You get some overcharges as well. Like,
just get
it's like, where have you got that figure from? The problem with that is it's then a bit embarrassing when you then accept
way less.
And it's like, well, hold on a second. Have you just been trying to mug off the brand?
Yeah. And then that doesn't.
And I don't think that is received that well, which is fair enough.
On the topic of negotiations then, is that something, like, in the influencer space, is it quite normal to negotiate back and forth on price? Because I think sometimes that can be scary is thinking, okay, I need to give you a price you're going to say yes to, because if you say no, then that's going to be the end of this conversation. But actually, one of the things I've noticed is that brands, or if you're working through an agency, they're really open to going back and forth quite a lot, and it doesn't seem to kind of put them off to kind of have that back and forth. What's your take on negotiating?
It's what we do all day.
Yeah.
It is the bread and butter of it, and there's lots of different ways you can negotiate. I feel like the best way to do it is obviously like in person. If I'm negotiating a long-term partnership, I'll ideally do it in person.
Really? See, as soon as you said that, I felt terrified, the thought of negotiating something in person. I think I like to hide behind my emails.
That's why I think it's easier to have that separation of I'm negotiating for someone else.
Sure.
And I know their value, I know all their case studies. Like, I would always try and negotiate that in person.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Or over the phone. Because also there's that human element. Like, you negotiate first with emotion, which sounds like you're not like crying or anything, but you're kind of, if someone comes in really low, you can say, oh, I'm actually, a bit disappointed by that. I feel like you're not understanding the value that X talent is adding. This is what we charge brand partners, XYZ. The reason why we do that is because of XYZ logic, rationale. I'm going into negotiation tips now. The other thing is,
no, it's good.
You always try and, if you can, sometimes it annoys brands, so you've got to be careful when you use this, but try and get them to tell you what their budget is first before anything goes into it, because they might have more budget than you think, or they might not have any budget and then it's not even worth your time. The best way to do that, again, is over the phone. Like, I'll typically like just really casually ask it. I'll be like, okay, so what are your KPIs, objectives, what are you trying to achieve, and what's your budget? And then if you kind of slip it in, I feel like it's easier to get the answer.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will say, oh, I'm not sure on the budget, can we have your rate card? Which is fair enough. And there's that. I mean, that's all part of the negotiation. And I would typically do that with someone I have a good relationship with as well.
Yeah.
So there's a time and a place to use that. I wouldn't necessarily encourage everyone listening to do that straight away. And do it with someone you have a good relationship with. Someone you've really worked with, maybe. Someone who knows that you are able to advise and consult on what your audience receives and best and how you convert them best.
Yeah.
Don't use ranges. Don't be like, oh, we'll accept anywhere from the range of 4 and 6. It's like, well,
obviously they're going to go with 4.
Yeah, they'll be like, 4's perfect then.
But it's interesting what you said there around like it being totally normal and I guess expected in the space to negotiate. Because like I said, I think there can be that fear of like, oh, I'll just give them a figure that's going to be like a yes straight away.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, I've looked back on the partnerships I've done where they've said yes straight away and I'm like, oh, probably that means I could have gone higher. If there was no negotiation, maybe I should have.
If we get a yes straight away, like the whole of Team TVH across this, we're disappointed. We've done it wrong.
Because it means you haven't got as much as you could have.
No, we need to be upping their rates. That's how we see it. So like at the end of every quarter, we discuss our talents' rates and I'm like, who's been getting yeses? And if any of them have been getting yeses, they're upped. We shouldn't be getting yeses.
That's really interesting. And I think quite comforting to hear as well, because you can think that pushback is a bad thing. Whereas, I mean, it's the brand's job to try and get, like, both are just trying to get the best they can, can't they? So actually that negotiation is...
I feel like a pushback is good and no response is bad. That's you've taken the piss a bit here.
Yeah.
And I can't be bothered to even engage with you.
Which I guess is partly where brand really wanting to work with you from the start is helpful, and then really knowing the value that you can bring, because then they're kind of already invested.
Yeah.
And then actually it's more about, okay, let's just land on a price that works.
Yeah.
As opposed to it being all about the price.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something I think that's relevant to maybe talk about from here then would be some of the kind of terms that you come across when talking about deals with brands. Because one of the things I've noticed around kind of pricing and negotiation is that actually asking a lot of questions about what the actual suggested deal is and understanding what all of those things mean is really important. I did a deal at the start of 2021. It must have, no, 2022. Yeah, start of 2022, I did a brand deal and I just didn't understand half of the words that were in the proposal, in the contract. And then I got to the end of that deal and I was like, I'm never, ever working with that brand again. That was the worst experience ever. And once I'd kind of actually thought about it and realised what a lot of those things meant, it was all my fault because I just hadn't understood what I was signing up for. And I feel like there's so many words that get thrown around that until you know what they mean, it's just like, yeah, cool, sounds good. And I feel like these words are both relevant to know what you're signing up for, but also I feel like they're really relevant when negotiating, because they're kind of levers that you can pull to either negotiate a higher price or you can accept a lower price providing some of these things get changed.
Yeah.
So, are you right if I just run you through some
Yeah.
keywords?
Love this.
Debunk them, tell us what they mean. First one we'll go for is usage. What does that mean? If
I
they
knew that was
say-
going to be the first one.
If they've told you something and you go, what's the usage? Or they go, the usage is this. What does that mean?
So there's two lots of usage. There's organic usage, which essentially means that the brand can use it on their channel. Normally you just want to make sure that you are being tagged, so then any like views you get on that, it's reverted back to your page. I tend to give the brand organic usage as part of if they're paying for the deliverables for a period of time.
Okay. Does that mean after that period of time they would delete it, or they just can't post it again?
They just can't post it again.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then there's paid usage, which is the important thing really, because that will determine how many people are seeing that piece of content. You'll have seen so many like horror story type things where like creators will sign away all their usage rights. So like, let's say like a Love Island creator, for example, or not a creator, a Love Island talent. Normally these people are trying to get into the media for a period of time. So they're signing agreements. Maybe they've like worked as a model or whatever it is. So they sign these agreements where they're like usage rights in perpetuity, like they're uncapped. Just completely, the brand can use the content however they want forever. So you'll see like Love Islanders going on, getting a following, and then all of these ads come out of the woodwork where people are pushing pieces of content with their face all over it, and it's like for their brands that were shot previously.
Interesting.
Because they own the content, and they then can use that to promote their brand with a face that's, you know, got value to it now. But it might be an ad that they don't necessarily want.
Yes.
So it might be like a teeth whitening ad or whatever it is. Like I've seen that time and time again, and I'm like, that is because you didn't look at your contract and you didn't think about it.
Yeah, or you just don't really like think about what that would mean.
Yeah,
because you might think, oh yeah, they want to use it. Cool, great. I want to be on their page. Or I remember thinking when someone first said about, this is one of the things I didn't understand that contract I did a few years ago around the paid usage. I think I just thought like, yeah, no bother, like I'll add a couple of £100 on for you to use it for paid, like that's free money. And then it wasn't until I started seeing my face pushed everywhere, and I was getting so many messages of people like, this has shown up on my Instagram loads, or like, and it just felt like my face was never ending.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, this is what that means.
Yeah.
I just think you don't really know, do you, until it happens and you go, oh, that's why people would charge a lot extra if the brand wants paid usage.
Exactly.
Perhaps.
And it's also like, how long do they want it for and how much money are they putting behind it? Sometimes they'll put like £100 behind it. That's not going to do very much. But sometimes they want to put like 20 grand behind it. And it's a bit like, those are different fees. You're charging different amounts for that.
Yeah.
It's a level up of like, who is, particularly for your followers, like they're in the business space. Like there's a small segment of brands. There's like not a small segment, but they're niche of brands that are going to work with them. Working with like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a brand that would work with a bit, like Plannable, for example, and they're being pushed out everywhere. Then all the other social media platforms or like planning and scheduling platforms won't want to work with them. And especially if they've given away usage for like 3 years and it's like uncapped paid usage, they can just literally exploit that content for as long as they want. The other thing worth considering in this situation is like creators. We've just signed someone on our exclusive roster, and she, before signing with us, signed a contract. Usage with them, with able to manipulate the content. So she's got this ad going around which isn't her voice but is her face,
Oh.
and it's just being pushed everywhere.
And she can't do anything about that?
No, because she signed it. So
And you wouldn't think that's what those two words mean. You just think, oh yeah, they want to cut the end off, or okay.
Yeah.
You'd think it's harmless.
Exactly. So these are the things you need to be really careful about, because it's about how your image is being pushed out to the public.
Yeah.
And like if you're trying to portray one thing on your platform and then it's just being used by brands in ways that you're not really that happy with, just need to make sure you're controlling that.
Yeah.
That's usage.
Usage. I feel like that's like a pretty key one, isn't it? To like ask those questions. Like if a brand comes to you to go, okay, like here are then the things. Because I feel like sometimes, and maybe this is me being, tell me if this is me being pessimistic, but I wonder if sometimes brands kind of just don't tell you all the detail and then it's hidden in the contract. And that's, I guess, kind of a win for them. Like, I think probably every conversation I've had to ask all those questions of like, what is the usage and what are the terms and the other words that we'll get to in a second. And so I think it's good to like be empowered with the knowledge, because then you can ask rather than, you know, like you've had with your talent, realising in hindsight what something meant.
It will have that, they'll be using their template more often than not. When we work with brands, we send our template, which controls all of this. But like, they'll be using their template, and more often than not, it'll be just a full buyout, because then they will be able to use the content in any way they want. Often they don't have bad intentions, but it's just like, well, we don't know how we're going to use the content, so we'd rather have the flexibility. Brands are more and more clued up on this. Agencies are more and more clued up on this and understanding. They will negotiate with you on these things. But yeah, it's definitely one to watch out for.
Okay, another term I think to watch out for, which sounds like it kind of links to that idea of working with other brands, exclusivity.
Yes, that's the other one,
Yeah.
the other key one.
Once you've described this one, I can give us a lovely horror story about what happens when you don't understand your
Oh,
exclusivity.
I've got so many horror stories as well. It means, so commercial exclusivity and organic exclusivity, or editorial, exclusivity, not organic, are two different things, which you should be aware of. Commercial exclusivity is when you can't work with another brand in that sector or who they deem a competitor. And editorial exclusivity is you cannot mention at all any brand like that is competitive with them, even in your organic content.
Interesting.
So there's a real big difference. And we've had some horror stories where brands, this is actually not managed by me, but brands have insisted on having editorial exclusivity.
And again, will that have a time cap to it,
yes.
typically?
I mean, you'd only really accept it with a time cap, but and with a fee associated with it. But like, where creators are then like, let's say they're YouTubers and they're walking around with their vlogs, if there's like a product in the back, that counts.
Like they walk past a new look.
Yeah, or like it's sort of like maybe their like kid is eating like, I mean, I've got a very clear example in my head, but let's say their kid is like eating a competitor. That is considered a breach.
Interesting.
So you need to be really careful of that particularly.
Yeah. So if they're asking for that, you charge a lot for it, I guess partly because you have to be so vigilant in order to make sure you don't cross that.
Exactly, especially if you're like a vlogger who literally films every single thing in their life. There's commercial exclusivity, which is ideally what you want to be giving away. Like, you don't want to, if the brand is pushing for editorial, then fine, have that conversation, up the rates, whatever. Properly understand what they're looking for. But then there's commercial exclusivity, which is you can't work or be paid to create content for a brand that sits in, that they deem a competitor. And the thing you need to be really careful about here is being really clear on what the brand is or the vertical is. Ideally, you want a list of brands.
Yeah.
Because it's like, otherwise they're like, okay, you can't work with any snacks. It's like, okay, well, Huel drinks a snack, or like, you know, crisps a snack, yes, probably, but like, you know, you might not consider it a snack. Or drinks a snack. You know, there's real like clarity that's lost. So we always ask for like a list of brands, and obviously you don't want a huge list of brands if you can avoid it. You want like the few main competitors, and then you can decide based on that, how restrictive is that? Do I need to up my fees based on that? If you're like a fashion creator and they're asking for exclusivity in the fashion category, you know, you're going to put a huge fee on that.
Yeah.
No, more often than not they wouldn't. They just ask for like brands, like a set list of brands. But if those brands are brands you might potentially work with, you need to add a fee to that.
So both usage and exclusivity can change the fee and are kind of tools to use in the negotiation. Final one then I want to mention, which was the one that I was particularly burned by with this experience, was around revisions.
Okay, yeah.
Just had not read that little piece, didn't even really understand what that meant. I was like, cool, good vibes, I'll sign the contract. Didn't feel that way when I was creating the 7th version of this video content. So tell us a little bit about what revisions mean and what we should look for.
Yeah, so I mean, most brands will try and get unlimited revisions.
When you say revisions, can we just define that?
Yes, so it's when you create a piece of content, you send it to the brand and they aren't happy with it for whatever reason. Sometimes it can be really subjective reasons.
I had it of even just like, we don't like that one word.
Yes.
Or like, you can't show that thing in the corner of your video. Like,
yes.
It can be tiny, right?
Really tiny things. To try and change the contract to make sure that it reflects what you think is fair. We try and get one round of factual amends, aka if you say the brand name wrong, or if you say the wrong price, or if you whatever, something that's factual. That's what we push for. We don't always get that. It's difficult when brands are, you know, they use their templates, you need to work with them to make sure everyone's happy with the content. Realistically, if the brand was hugely unhappy with the content and we felt that what they were saying was fair, we'd probably reshoot it anyway. But we always try and push for no reshoots. So if it's like something you can amend in the copy, that's typically fine because it's not too difficult. But if you're reshooting, and it's subjective, it's not fair. So you just need to make sure that that line is something you feel comfortable with. If this is a brand that's paying you a lot of money, you want to keep them happy and you want them to like the content. In my opinion, yes, get the contract sorted tight, however you want it to look. But the key thing is sending over creative concept and getting that approved with a script, and then creating the content based on that. Because if you've done that, there's going to be no miscommunication. It's literally like, this is exactly what I'm creating. I've created it. And then if they're like, hold on a second, I didn't like the word "and" there, you can be like, well, you approved that. You've already approved it. So we were agreed that this is what I was creating. That really, really eases the process. We don't create content without an approved creative concept now.
That makes a lot of sense. Almost having a really, really clear brief, then that concept signed off, like as much as you can done before you actually create the content that then sets you up in the best way. What I was burned by was that exact situation you said, where they accept the concept and then they change their mind. In this case, it was legal. They kept going, no, legal doesn't like that, I change it. And then they go, oh no, they don't like that. And I think having like, because it said unlimited revisions in the contract, I'd absolutely no like pushback. Whereas I guess in those more rare circumstances, like you said, if your contract is tight, you can use it. But like you said, the end goal being to give them the best content possible, you can, I think with the contract, you can always give more. So it's better for it to be tighter, I guess. And then you can always do more if you want to.
If it's unfair, I will push back. But if they've like not hit the brief, or they've actually said something wrong and they'd added something in that wasn't already approved, I just find having that creative treatment approved and the script approved, because legal should have approved the script. In that sort of case, I'd just be really pushy and be like, can you confirm that legal have, like on the second round of like, can you confirm that legal have approved this script word for word? And that this creative treatment has been approved word for word, because I'm going to create exactly this.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to create it until I have that confirmed in writing. That should avoid that back and forth.
Yeah, it's all about clarity, I guess, isn't it? Clarity and communication.
Exactly.
One of the questions I got from people when I said that you were coming on the podcast and asked what people wanted to know, I feel like you've answered by talking about all these things, but a lot of questions actually came up around like, do you need a contract?
Yes.
I feel like you can probably give a very quick answer to that one with all of those things in mind.
Yes, you absolutely need a contract, even for like payment terms, which are a huge one. Just understanding what is expected of you. If you can, use your own contract, but more often than not, they're going to ask you to use theirs. And just make sure you understand everything, like read through and make sure you really understand the commercials more than anything, and that you understand like how and when you're going to be paid is a really key one too, because sometimes they'll be like 60 days, 30 days after the content's gone live or whatever, and it's like, well, hang on, I'm not getting paid 90 days after I've delivered this work. So it's really careful. You've got to be really careful to make sure that you're like looking into all of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then with that in mind, the final thing I want to ask is around having management. Because obviously, like you said, I feel like you kind of come from both angles there. If you can see, as you said earlier, the value of it for the people that need it, but you can also see the people that don't, how actually a lot of what they need is just the expertise, which I love that you've created a kind of way for people to access that. Do you have almost a kind of checklist perhaps for people of like signs that they might be a right fit for having management, or perhaps when on their journey of doing kind of more brand partnerships, it might be something for them to explore?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is you are unable to look after the workflow yourself and do everything all together, because you need to be commercial in order to get good management. You don't want to sign to a bad management. I've had so many people with horror stories.
Yeah.
Anyone and everyone call themselves influencer experts. When I started my TikTok account, really well known, or like agencies that were referring to themselves as influencer experts were messaging me for advice on how to manage talent. And I thought, hold on a second, you're telling your community and the people your clients, the people you represent, that you're an influencer expert, and you're asking someone how to manage influencers. So I'd just be really, really careful about signing up too early in a stage of your career to some kind of really like one-sided contract.
Yeah. I guess people can sometimes see it as like a sign of success, or like an honour, or like it's kind of this really shiny thing. So maybe go into it slightly blind to actually the potential cons if it's not the right fit.
I always say to creators, you need to try managing yourself first, because otherwise you're not sure are they adding value. You can't tell because you don't know. When I take on creators, I like to see that we've actually hugely increased what they're earning. Otherwise, I'm a bit disappointed. And I'm like, are we adding value here? And if we're adding value in terms of like events or whatever and profiling, positioning, then great. But I want to be really adding value.
Yeah.
Like our creators on a roster are thrilled with the outcome of our management because they know, because they've managed themselves first.
Yeah.
So make sure you're doing those deals, turning them around, trying to do it, get involved, like join a non-exclusive roster like ours, do it yourself for a little bit of time before you try and get management, to avoid signing up to the wrong management. Make sure that you have enough going on to justify it, because you also don't want to be small fish, big pond. Is that the...
Yes.
That's something you see. Like if you join a management with like who have hundreds of creators on their books, how much time are you actually getting? Are they pitching you out? Like it's hard to know, but you wouldn't know because...
Yeah.
So yeah, those are all the things to be really careful of. I feel like I've gone off topic.
No, it's really helpful, I think, to think about, like you said, do it yourself first and then consider what would be the value I'd be looking for in management. And I guess that then puts you in a more kind of, you're questioning them a bit more probably, instead of just thinking, I need management, or yeah, that's a sign of success. Actually going, okay, if I'm doing it myself and it's okay, what, like you said, what would be the value of someone doing it for me? And if they're not, from what I've heard from friends that have had bad management experiences, it's often been, as you said, their management that isn't proactive, that isn't pitching for them, because then they almost think, well, I'm getting all these deals without you, so why are you taking 20% if you're not then, like you said, actually making me more money than I would have made?
Sometimes that does happen, but like for example, like with creators, it might be that you're maximising the inbound that they're getting.
Yeah, like negotiating to be better.
Which is great. That's fine.
I guess if they're just like taking the deals you would have got anyway, not negotiating them, it's like, what's the...
Exactly. So that's what you need to be careful of. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other things to be careful of, when to know you're right for management. You've already got kind of a level of brand partnerships and actually you want to elevate that. Like you need to take that stuff that you're maybe not so good at away, so you have more time to focus on creativity, personal brand, like all of those things, the things that you feel good at. You need the network. You need like, and you're in a place to maximize that network, because you know my contacts at TikTok, Instagram, whatever, if I'm introducing them to a talent that they find exciting, they'll take the time to get to know them. Again, like you might, if you're not kind of at that place where you're growing quickly or you're getting really lots of engagement, etc., maybe you're not going to be able to maximize that network. So there's no point you having 20% taken in order to get those connections.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So it's case by case. It's different for every creator, which I realise is a bit of a difficult one because it's no like full clarity, but like I think it is always case by case. Like we will take on a creator with 20,000 followers if we think that we can maximize what they're doing.
Yeah.
And we have done, and like we've changed people's careers. When they have 20,000 followers, it's not really about followers, it's about how you can elevate what they're doing.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like I've got so much to think about after everything you've shared. As we kind of round off, I'm just wondering if there's anything from, you know, the years and years of experience that you've had in this space. Perhaps if there's one thing you might want to share that perhaps people wouldn't know about the influencer or creator industry, or about working with brands. Maybe it's a misconception or something that you think people are often surprised to learn or hear.
I think, I don't know if this is really said actually. I think people have this idea that being a creator or influencer is like really easy. Working with lots of creators and having seen, you know, their career growth and development and everything, yes, there's lots of money to be made, and yes, it sounds amazing, 10k for one TikTok, whatever it is, and that is amazing and it's such privilege, but there's a mental load that comes with it, like a real mental load of like sort of having to give yourself like a part of yourself away, and always being on like a content treadmill. Like everything to them is potential content. Everything is like you might be having dinner with your family and you can't just be like, oh, I'm just having dinner with my family, work's done. Everything is potential content, and I think that's not a trade-off. Like, I mean, I personally would find that really hard, I think, because I like having my, like, I mean, our job is very on as well, but not in the same way. Like, even in trying to create content myself, I'm literally like, this is so hard. Like, I don't feel like creating content right now. So I don't think it's as easy as people always make out. Like, everyone's always like, just post a few TikToks and then you will earn loads of money. But actually growing that audience consistently and showing up consistently and putting yourself out there consistently and finding a niche and being entertaining constantly quite difficult, and I don't want to be like, woe is me, influencers have it really hard. But I guess for me, that's the one thing I feel like people don't see. They just get a lot of trolling and hate, and like the word influence is a dirty word, but like I think there's more to it than that. It's not black and white.
I'm really glad you said that though, because I think it can be seen, you know, to people that are listening where they've already got kind of income streams or a business and it's something that they look to add in. I think it can be almost seen as this like easy, like magic money that you just, oh, I've built this audience, and as a result of that, oh, I can now make this, £5,000 through a couple of videos. And like you said, like there is a lot of money to be made. That's one of my biggest realizations in doing brand partnerships, is like, there is money and people are willing to give you money. There's something in exchange for that. And even the workload that goes into it. Like, I was so shocked the first like reel I had to make for a brand. I just thought, oh yeah, half an hour's work. I think it took me like a day and a half.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is, you know, it's not hard graft, but it's, I meant hard, I was going to use an analogy. I was going to say it's not hard graft in like, you know, I'm not out like building a house all day and like whatever. My brother's a doctor, so I always liken my job to him and I think like, okay, I'm not saving lives, not quite that high stress, but it is work.
Yeah.
Like, it's not as easy as you might expect. And I think that's actually a good note to end on, because it's then having realistic expectations and not feeling deflated if at points it is tricky or you get frustrated or you feel you get rejected, you know, whatever it might be. Actually, there are challenging parts of it too.
That's it. Brands aren't paying you for the TikTok. They're paying you for the years of work that have gone before that of creating free content and building an audience and building trust and building authenticity. And I think that's what, like, the disconnect. So yeah, definitely don't feel disheartened. Like, you have to work. For majority of creators who are out there have worked for free for a long period of time creating this content, which people see as like a hobby, but it's building an audience, it's building authenticity, it's building that unique connection, and most creators have done that for years before being paid.
Yeah, it's so true. So true. I love that. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. I feel like I could ask so many more questions, so we'll have to have you for a part 2 in a few months' time.
Me. It's been so fun.
I will leave all of your links in the show notes so people can come and find your content. I can attest your TikTok content is not only so helpful but also just so interesting. Like, you do like case studies and like talk about different creators in the space. So I'll leave that link there, and then also of course to TBH Talent so people can come and find out about your non-exclusive roster. I think what you're building there is so needed. So thank you for what you're doing in the space, and yeah,
thank you
for everyone to listen to what you shared.
Thank you, Alan.